I smoothed down my grandmother's vintage navy blazer one last time before stepping into the glass conference room on the 42nd floor. The quarterly board meeting was about to begin, and I clutched my worn leather portfolio against my chest like a shield. Director Patricia Williams glanced up from her notes, and her expression immediately soured. She looked me up and down with undisguised disgust before announcing loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You really came in that—" The conference room erupted in snickers and whispered comments as Patricia continued her public humiliation. "Honestly, Claire, you look like you don't belong in corporate." I remained silent, feeling heat rise in my cheeks while my colleagues exchanged amused glances. But I knew something Patricia didn't. In exactly 30 minutes, when the board arrived, everything would change forever. The laughter in the conference room felt like needles pricking my skin as Patricia Williams positioned herself at the head of the mahogany table, clearly relishing her moment of power. She gestured toward my simple black dress and grandmother's carefully pressed blazer with theatrical disdain. "I mean, seriously," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a Fortune 500 company, not a thrift store fashion show." More chuckles rippled through the room as she warmed to her audience. "We have standards here, people, professional standards." I could feel my face burning, but I kept my expression neutral. The truth was, I had chosen this outfit very deliberately. My grandmother had always taught me that real worth came from character and competence, not designer labels. She had worn this same blazer to her first job interview at the telephone company in 1958, where she worked her way up from secretary to regional manager, despite having only a high school education. After graduating summa cum laude from Wharton Business School, I could have walked into any executive position I wanted. But I had deliberately chosen to start at the bottom of this company, using only my first name and my mother's maiden name on my application. I wanted to understand how this organization really worked, to see what employees experienced when they didn't have family connections protecting them. Patricia, meanwhile, had climbed the corporate ladder through careful networking and strategic positioning rather than genuine talent. I had spent the past 18 months watching her operate, taking detailed notes on her management style and treatment of subordinates. She had a particular talent for identifying employees she perceived as vulnerable or different, then systematically undermining their confidence. Tom Bradley, the vice president of finance, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was a decent man in his 50s with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Patricia, maybe we should focus on the agenda items," he suggested gently. "The board will be here soon." Patricia whirled around to face him, her perfectly styled blonde hair swinging with the movement. "Tom, this is exactly the kind of thing the board needs to see. We cannot have employees representing our company who clearly don't understand basic professional presentation." She turned back to me with a saccharine smile. "Nothing personal, Claire, but image matters in business." Sarah Chen, the marketing director, sat frozen at the far end of the table. She was a brilliant strategist in her early 30s who had been Patricia's target on multiple occasions. Her dark eyes met mine briefly, and I saw recognition there. She understood what it felt like to be in Patricia's crosshairs. David Rodriguez, the operations manager, leaned back in his leather chair with obvious amusement. He was Patricia's eager follower, a man in his 40s who had learned that agreeing with her assessments was the quickest path to her approval. "You have to admit Patricia has a point," he said with a smirk. "First impressions are everything in this business." Patricia beamed at his support. "Exactly, David. Thank you for understanding." She clasped her hands together and addressed the room like a teacher explaining a lesson to slow students. "This is precisely why I'm recommending that Claire be transferred to a more suitable department. Perhaps something in the back office where client interaction isn't required." My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to remain calm. Patricia was about to make her biggest mistake yet, and I needed to let her dig this hole as deep as possible. "Stand up, Claire," Patricia commanded, pointing at me with one manicured finger. "I want everyone to see what I mean about appropriate executive presence." I rose slowly, keeping my dignity intact despite the humiliating circumstances. Patricia walked around me like a judge at a dog show, pointing out perceived flaws in my appearance. See how the blazer is outdated, and that dress is clearly from a discount store. The shoes are practical rather than powerful. This entire ensemble sends the wrong message about our company culture. Tom Bradley looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Sarah Chen stared down at her hands. David Rodriguez nodded along enthusiastically with each criticism. Now, I want to be clear, Patricia continued. This isn't about being mean. This is about maintaining standards. Claire seems like a nice enough person, but she's simply not executive material. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions about cultural fit. Just then, my phone buzzed softly against the conference table. I glanced down and saw a text message from a contact labeled Chairwoman Elizabeth. The message read, "Running 5 minutes late, sweetheart. Save me a seat next to you." I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth, but I quickly suppressed it. Patricia was still talking, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to face the consequences of her cruelty in the most public way possible. As I was saying, Patricia announced to the room, appropriate presentation is not optional in corporate America. It's a requirement. And unfortunately, some people simply don't understand that. She looked directly at me with triumph in her eyes, completely unaware that her career was about to come to a spectacular end. Patricia's voice had taken on an almost evangelical fervor as she continued her lecture on corporate appearance standards. She assigned me to take meeting minutes, explaining condescendingly that it was more my speed than participating in actual business discussions. She gestured toward a small side table positioned near the window, well away from the main conference area. "Claire, if you could set up over there," she said with a false sweetness. "That way you can focus on your note-taking without being a distraction during the important conversations." As I gathered my belongings and moved to the designated exile spot, I wrestled with a decision that could alter the trajectory of multiple careers. Part of me wanted to end this humiliation immediately, to stand up and reveal exactly who I was. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, reminding me that patience often revealed more truth than quick action. "Let people show you who they really are before you show them who you are," she had always said. "That way you'll know exactly what you're dealing with." I had been collecting evidence of Patricia's behavior for months, documenting patterns that went far beyond simple rudeness. She had a systematic approach to identifying and targeting employees she deemed beneath her standards. 3 talented people had already quit because of her harassment, and I suspected there were others who had suffered in silence. Patricia busied herself rearranging the seating chart for the board meeting, ensuring that I would be barely visible when the executives arrived. She made pointed comments about knowing your place and understanding hierarchies, while moving name placards around the polished table. "It's important that our board members see organization and structure," she explained to David Rodriguez, who nodded enthusiastically. "We can't have people sitting wherever they please, like it's some kind of casual gathering." During a brief break while Patricia stepped out to check on catering arrangements, Tom Bradley approached my table with obvious discomfort. His face was flushed with embarrassment, and he kept glancing toward the door, as if afraid Patricia might return and catch him talking to me. "Claire, I want to apologize for not speaking up more forcefully," he said quietly. "What Patricia is doing isn't right, and I should have stopped it." I looked up from my notepad and saw genuine regret in his eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Tom. It means more than you know." He ran his hand through his graying hair and sighed. "I've seen her do this before, and I always tell myself I'll handle it better next time. But when the moment comes," he shrugged helplessly. "Fear can make us all smaller than we want to be," I said softly. "But recognizing it is the first step toward changing it." Tom looked surprised by my response. For a moment, he studied my face as if seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "You're different than I initially thought," he admitted. Before I could respond, Patricia returned with a fresh cup of coffee and renewed energy for her campaign. Tom quickly returned to his seat, leaving me alone with my thoughts and growing evidence. Sarah Chen seized her own opportunity when Patricia was distracted by a phone call. She approached my table with nervous steps glancing around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. "This happened to me 6 months ago," she whispered urgently. "Patricia called a meeting just to criticize my presentation style in front of the entire marketing team. She said I was too ethnic for client-facing roles." Sarah's voice trembled with remembered humiliation. "I almost quit that day." I felt a surge of anger on her behalf, but I kept my voice calm. "What stopped you? Bills to pay and nowhere else to go?" Sarah said bitterly. "But watching what she's doing to you now brings it all back. Someone needs to stop her." "Someone will," I said with quiet certainty. Sarah looked confused by my confidence, but Patricia's sharp voice cut through our conversation. "Sarah, I hope you're not filling Claire's head with ideas about challenging authority," Patricia called out with false joviality. "We've discussed the importance of accepting feedback gracefully." Sarah's jaw clenched, but she returned to her seat without another word. I continued taking notes, but now I was documenting Patricia's every comment and behavior. My phone positioned discreetly beside my notepad was recording everything she said. David Rodriguez, emboldened by Patricia's obvious approval, began making increasingly cruel observations. "You know, Patricia, maybe we should consider implementing a dress code policy," he suggested, "something that clearly outlines minimum standards for professional appearance." Patricia's eyes lit up. "David, that's brilliant. We could use Claire's situation as a case study for why such policies are necessary." She looked directly at me while speaking, ensuring I understood that I was being used as a negative example. "I mean, if someone can't figure out basic professional presentation on their own," David continued, "maybe they need more explicit guidance about expectations in a corporate environment." I continued writing, steadily capturing every word of their conversation. They were providing me with a detailed record of discriminatory behavior that would be impossible to deny or explain away later. As the hour approached for the board's arrival, Patricia received a call informing her that the executives were in the building. Her energy reached a fever pitch as she made final preparations for what she clearly saw as her moment of professional triumph. "Now remember, everyone," she announced to the room, "we want to make a strong impression today. The board needs to see that we understand excellence and maintain appropriate standards." She glanced meaningfully in my direction. "They need to see that we address problems before they become bigger issues." David Rodriguez grinned. "Should we expect some announcements today about personnel changes?" Patricia's smile was predatory. "Let's just say that today's meeting will clarify some things about cultural fit and organizational direction." She had essentially just announced her intention to publicly fire me in front of the board members. I felt a moment of genuine amazement at her complete lack of awareness. Patricia was about to attempt terminating the great-granddaughter of the company founder in front of the current chairwoman, who happened to be my mother. The irony was so perfect that it almost felt scripted. As elevator bells chimed somewhere down the hallway, Patricia made one final adjustment to her appearance in the reflection of the conference room windows. She straightened her designer suit jacket and checked her lipstick, preparing for what she believed would be the pinnacle of her career. "Stay in your designated area, Claire," she instructed with sweet venom, "and try not to embarrass the company any further than you already have." I looked up from my notes and met her eyes directly. "I don't think that will be a problem, Patricia." Something in my tone must have registered because for just a moment, her confident expression flickered. But the sound of approaching voices in the hallway quickly restored her sense of superiority. The conference room hummed with nervous energy as Patricia put the finishing touches on her presentation materials. She had spent the past few minutes arranging documents with military precision, each page positioned exactly where she wanted it for maximum impact. Her laptop displayed a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Maintaining Excellence Cultural Fit in Modern Business," and I could see that one of the slides contained subtle references to inappropriate workplace presence and corrective actions needed. Patricia gathered David Rodriguez into a whispered conversation near the windows, their heads bent together like conspirators planning a coup. I couldn't hear their exact words, but David's occasional glances in my direction made their topic clear. They were finalizing their strategy for my public humiliation. "The key is to frame it positively," Patricia murmured to David, her voice just loud enough for me to catch fragments. We're not criticizing anyone personally. We're protecting company standards and brand integrity." David nodded eagerly, his ambition written clearly across his features. "Should I mention the dress code policy idea during the discussion?" "Perfect timing," Patricia agreed. "When I bring up the personnel issue, you can suggest that we need clearer guidelines to prevent future situations." She shot another meaningful look in my direction. Sometimes people need explicit instruction about what's appropriate in a professional environment. I continued taking notes, my pen moving steadily across the page as I documented their planning session. They were being remarkably careless about their volume, apparently assuming that I was too intimidated or defeated to pay attention to their scheming. Sarah Chen sat rigidly at the far end of the table, her marketing reports forgotten as she watched the conspiracy unfold. Her dark eyes met mine briefly, and I saw a mixture of sympathy and resignation there. She had been in my position before, and she knew how devastating Patricia's public attacks could be. Tom Bradley was making a valiant attempt to review financial projections, but his concentration was clearly broken. Every few minutes, he would glance up from his papers with obvious discomfort, as if he could feel the toxic energy building in the room, but didn't know how to address it. Meanwhile, my phone had buzzed twice more with messages from my mother. The first read, "Just parked, elevator is slow today." The second said, "Looking forward to seeing how you've been settling in. Hope your colleagues have been welcoming." I almost laughed at that last message. If only she knew how welcoming Patricia had been over the past 18 months. But my mother was about to get a first-hand demonstration of the workplace culture that had developed under Patricia's leadership. Patricia returned to her position at the head of the table and announced to the room, "I want everyone to be prepared for some frank discussions today about maintaining our competitive edge. The board expects us to address issues that could impact our reputation or effectiveness." She paused dramatically, letting her words sink in. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions about personnel who may not be aligned with our organizational values or presentation standards. David Rodriguez straightened in his chair, ready to play his supporting role. "Patricia, I think everyone appreciates your commitment to excellence. It takes courage to address problems that other managers might ignore." "Thank you, David. That's exactly the kind of leadership mindset the board wants to see from our management team." Patricia's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who believed she was about to deliver a masterful performance. Tom Bradley finally looked up from his financial reports, unable to ignore the conversation any longer. "Patricia, are you planning to discuss specific personnel matters in front of the full board that seems unusual for a quarterly business review?" Patricia's smile tightened slightly. "Tom, when performance issues impact overall department effectiveness, they become legitimate board topics. We can't compartmentalize problems that affect our entire organization." "But shouldn't those conversations happen through proper HR channels first?" Tom pressed, showing more backbone than I had seen from him before. "HR has been informed of my concerns," Patricia replied smoothly, though I knew that was a lie. She had been building her case against me, privately planning to present the board with a fait accompli rather than following proper procedures. Sarah Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Patricia, I thought today's meeting was focused on quarterly results and strategic planning." Patricia turned her attention to Sarah with barely concealed irritation. "Sarah, I appreciate your input, but as department director, I decide what topics require board attention. Perhaps you could focus on preparing your marketing metrics instead of questioning my agenda." The rebuke was mild by Patricia's standards, but it effectively silenced Sarah's objections. She returned to her papers with flushed cheeks, another reminder of the power dynamics that governed our workplace. Patricia's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen with obvious excitement. "Security says the board members are in the elevator now. Everyone, please take your assigned seats and remember what we've discussed about presenting a professional image." She looked directly at me as she said this last part, her meaning unmistakable. I was to remain in my corner like a cautionary tale, visible enough to serve as her negative example, but positioned to minimize any disruption to the important conversations. As the sound of voices grew closer in the hallway, Patricia made one final adjustment to the conference room setup. She moved her presentation materials to ensure optimal sight lines and double-checked that her laptop was ready to display her slides at a moment's notice. "This is what real leadership looks like," she murmured to David Rodriguez, who nodded with admiration. "Sometimes you have to make tough choices to protect the integrity of your organization." I closed my notebook and set down my pen, no longer needing to document Patricia's behavior. In less than 60 seconds, she was going to provide a live demonstration of her management philosophy in front of the very people who had the power to judge its appropriateness. The conference room door began to open, and Patricia straightened her shoulders with visible pride. She believed she was about to showcase her executive judgment and commitment to excellence. Instead, she was about to learn that true excellence meant treating every employee with dignity and respect, regardless of their apparent status or family connections. I stood up slowly and took a step toward the main conference table, knowing that everything was about to change. "Stay in your designated area, Claire," Patricia whispered sharply, her attention divided between maintaining her professional smile and keeping me in my assigned place. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about where I belong," I replied quietly, my voice carrying a new certainty that made Patricia's confident expression waver for the first time all morning. The door swung open fully, and my mother stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention from everyone present. Patricia's moment of triumph was about to become her moment of reckoning. Board chairwoman Elizabeth Ashford entered the conference room like a force of nature, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her navy blue suit radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of corporate leadership. At 62, she moved with the confidence of someone who had built her career on decisive action and unwavering principles. Her gray eyes swept the room, taking in the seating arrangements, the nervous energy of the management team, and the obvious tension that hung in the air like smoke. But when her gaze found me standing near the side table, her entire demeanor transformed. The professional mask fell away, replaced by the warm expression of a mother who hadn't seen her daughter in weeks. Patricia stepped forward with her hand extended, ready to deliver what she had rehearsed as her opening remarks. "Chairwoman Ashford, welcome to our quarterly review. I'm Patricia Williams, director of..." But my mother walked past Patricia's outstretched hand as if she didn't exist. She crossed the room in 4 purposeful strides, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor, and wrapped me in a warm embrace that smelled of her signature Chanel perfume and the lavender soap she had used for as long as I could remember. "Claire Ashford," she said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "there's my brilliant daughter." The conference room fell into the kind of stunned silence that follows unexpected explosions. Patricia's hand was still extended in midair, her greeting dying on her lips as she processed what had just happened. Her face went through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, a dawning understanding that made her skin turn the color of ash. David Rodriguez's mouth literally dropped open, his ambitious smile freezing into a grimace of shock. Sarah Chen's hands flew to cover her face as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. Tom Bradley leaned back in his chair as if he had been physically struck, his financial reports forgotten, as he stared at the embrace happening in the center of the room. "Mom," I said softly, returning her hug with genuine affection, "it's good to see you." Elizabeth held me at arm's length, studying my face with maternal concern. "You look tired, sweetheart. Have you been working too hard?" Her eyes took in my grandmother's blazer and the simple dress that Patricia had spent the morning mocking. "And you're wearing Grandma Rose's blazer. She would be so proud to see you following in her footsteps." I felt tears prick at my eyes, remembering my grandmother's stories about earning respect through competence rather than connections. I wanted to understand what she experienced when she was starting out. Patricia had finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Claire Ashford." Elizabeth turned toward Patricia with the kind of polite attention she might give to a junior employee who had interrupted an important conversation. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Patricia Williams." Patricia managed her professional smile, cracking around the edges. "I'm the department director. Claire reports to me." "Does she..." Elizabeth's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath the politeness. And how has that working relationship been progressing? Patricia's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. It's been fine. Claire is a dedicated employee who shows up consistently and follows instructions well. I almost felt sorry for her in that moment. Patricia was trying to maintain the fiction that she had been a supportive manager, but her earlier performance had too many witnesses for that strategy to work. Elizabeth noticed the seating arrangement for the first time, her gaze moving from the main conference table to my isolated position near the window. I'm curious about something, Patricia. Why is my daughter sitting over there alone while the rest of the management team is gathered around the main table? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Patricia's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crumble, and everyone in the room could see it happening in real time. Well, we have different seating arrangements for different types of participants. Patricia explained, her voice climbing half an octave as stress took its toll. Claire was taking meeting minutes, so we positioned her where she could focus on that responsibility without being distracted by the main discussions. Elizabeth's expression remained neutral, but I knew that look. She was gathering information, building a complete picture before making any judgments. I see, and taking minutes isn't something that could be done from the main table. David Rodriguez, who had been Patricia's enthusiastic supporter just minutes before, now sat frozen in his chair like a deer caught in headlights. The man who had been ready to help implement dress code policies was suddenly very interested in studying his own hands. Sarah Chin had lowered her hands from her face, but her expression showed a mixture of shock and something that might have been vindicated satisfaction. She had been Patricia's victim before, and she was watching justice begin to unfold. Tom Bradley was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. His financial background had taught him to look for patterns and warning signs, and he was clearly recognizing that he had just watched Patricia commit career suicide in front of the company's most powerful executive. Patricia was desperately trying to regain control of the situation. Chairwoman Ashford, I hope you understand that we maintain certain protocols here to ensure efficient operations. Claire's positioning was purely functional based on her role in today's meeting. Her role, Elizabeth repeated thoughtfully. And what exactly is Claire's official position in this department? Patricia's pause lasted just a moment too long. She's a junior analyst in our strategic planning division. Elizabeth turned back to me with raised eyebrows. Junior analyst, I thought you were working in operations management. I've been rotating through different departments, I explained, keeping my voice steady, getting a comprehensive understanding of how the company functions at every level. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. Smart approach. Your grandfather always said you couldn't lead what you didn't understand. She looked back at Patricia. I assume Claire's rotation has been positive. She's learning valuable skills and contributing meaningfully to your team's success. Patricia's professional smile was beginning to look more like a grimace. Absolutely. Claire brings a unique perspective to our operations. But Elizabeth had noticed something else now. The way Patricia kept glancing nervously at David Rodriguez, the uncomfortable silence from the rest of the team, and the subtle tension that suggested she had walked into the aftermath of something significant. Has something happened here this morning? Elizabeth asked directly, her executive instincts telling her that there was more to this story than simple seating arrangements and department rotations. Patricia's face went completely white. She realized that Elizabeth wasn't going to be satisfied with vague explanations and diplomatic answers. The chairwoman was going to dig until she found the truth, and Patricia had just spent an hour creating witnesses to behavior that was impossible to defend. I think, Elizabeth said quietly, that Claire should tell me about her experience working in this department. From her perspective, it was a loaded question that would determine Patricia's fate. As I considered my response, Patricia realized that her career hung in the balance of how the granddaughter of the company founder chose to answer her own mother, the chairwoman of the board. The woman who had spent the morning humiliating me for wearing my grandmother's clothes was about to learn that real power had nothing to do with expensive suits or corner offices. I took a measured breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around us like gravity. Every person in the room was waiting to see how I would respond to my mother's question, but none more intensely than Patricia, whose entire career now hung on the mercy of the woman she had spent months belittling. Mom, my experience here has been educational. I began choosing my words carefully. I've learned a great deal about different management styles and company culture. Patricia's shoulders sagged slightly with what might have been relief. For a moment, she seemed to think I might show mercy, that I would protect her the same way she would never have protected me. Her diplomatic smile flickered back to life as she interpreted my measured response as salvation, but I wasn't finished. However, I think it would be valuable to share some specific examples with you and the board. I continued reaching for my phone and notebook. I've been documenting interactions that might be relevant to our discussions about workplace culture and employee development. Patricia's face went from pale to gray as she realized that her brief moment of hope had been premature. I had spent 18 months collecting evidence, and she was about to discover exactly how thorough my documentation had been. What kind of examples? Elizabeth asked, her voice taking on the crisp tone she used in board meetings when serious issues were being discussed. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. This morning before you arrived, there was an extended discussion about professional presentation and company standards. Patricia felt it was important to address what she called cultural fit issues in front of the entire management team. Tom Bradley straightened in his chair, recognizing that the moment for passive observation had ended. His face was flushed with embarrassment as he realized he was about to be called as a witness to Patricia's behavior. What did this discussion involve? Elizabeth inquired, her gray eyes moving between Patricia and me with laser focus. Patricia publicly criticized my clothing choices, used me as a negative example of professional appearance, and announced her intention to recommend my transfer to what she called a more suitable department. I explained, my voice remaining steady despite the emotional weight of recounting the humiliation. Patricia opened her mouth to protest, but Elizabeth raised one hand to silence her. I'd like to hear the specific words that were used. I tapped my phone screen, and the morning's conversation began to play through the device's speaker. Patricia's voice filled the room crystal clear, and undeniably her own. You really came in that honestly, Claire. You look like you don't belong in corporate. The recording continued, capturing her comments about thrift store fashion, appropriate executive presence, and the need to maintain company standards. David Rodriguez's enthusiastic agreement was clearly audible, as was Tom Bradley's weak attempt to redirect the conversation. As the recording played, I watched the faces around the table. Sarah Chen was nodding slowly, recognizing the pattern of behavior she had experienced herself. Tom Bradley looked increasingly sick as he heard his own failure to intervene played back. David Rodriguez was staring at the table as if he could disappear through the wood. But Patricia's expression was the most telling. She was watching Elizabeth's face, searching desperately for any sign that the chairwoman might dismiss this as a minor interpersonal conflict rather than a serious violation of company values. When the recording reached Patricia's announcement about recommending my transfer, Elizabeth's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But when Patricia's voice declared that I was not executive material and needed to understand cultural fit, Elizabeth's eyes went cold in a way that made the room feel 10 degrees cooler. The recording ended, and silence stretched for several long seconds. Tom, Elizabeth said finally, as a witness to this conversation, do you confirm that this recording accurately represents what occurred this morning? Tom Bradley cleared his throat, his face deeply troubled. Yes, Chairwoman Ashford. That's exactly what happened. And I'm ashamed to say that I didn't intervene as strongly as I should have. Elizabeth nodded, her expression showing both disappointment and respect for his honesty. Sarah, were you also present for this conversation? Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, her voice stronger than I had heard it all morning. And this isn't the first time I've witnessed Patricia engage in this type of behavior. She's targeted other employees with similar criticisms. Patricia finally found her voice. Chairwoman Ashford, I want you to understand that this is being taken completely out of context. I was providing constructive feedback about professional presentation which is part of my responsibility as a department director. I had no idea that she had family connections to the company. Elizabeth's expression remained unchanged. So you're saying that if you had known Claire's identity, you would have treated her differently? Patricia realized immediately that she had walked into a trap. No, I was trying to help her understand corporate expectations, by humiliating her in front of her colleagues. Elizabeth's voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. By using her as a negative example of what's appropriate in our workplace, other board members began filing into the room at that moment, having arrived while we were focused on the recording. I recognized several faces from company photos: the vice chairman, the head of the audit committee, and two independent directors who had been recruited for their expertise in employment law and corporate governance. Elizabeth quickly brought them up to speed on the situation, explaining that we were addressing a serious workplace conduct issue that had come to light during the quarterly review preparation. The vice chairman, a distinguished man in his 70s, named Robert Chen, listened to the recording with growing alarm. This type of behavior creates significant legal liability for the company, he said when it finished. We've had multiple seminars about creating inclusive workplace environments. Patricia was now facing not just Elizabeth's judgment, but the scrutiny of the entire board leadership. Her carefully planned presentation about maintaining excellence had become an examination of her own failures as a manager. Patricia, Elizabeth said, I need you to understand that this company was built by my grandfather on principles of respect and merit, not superficial judgments about appearance or background. My grandmother, Rose Ashford, whose blazer Claire is wearing today, started as a secretary and became one of our most effective regional managers because she was judged on her competence and character. She paused, letting her words sink in. What you've demonstrated this morning is exactly the opposite of everything our company stands for. Patricia made one last, desperate attempt to save her career. Chairwoman Ashford, I deeply regret any misunderstanding. If I had known Claire's family connections— Stop right there, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice cutting through Patricia's plea like a blade. The fact that you're still talking about family connections proves that you don't understand the problem. Every employee in this company deserves to be treated with respect regardless of who their relatives might be. The board members exchanged meaningful glances. This wasn't just about one manager's poor judgment. It was about fundamental corporate values and legal compliance. Patricia Williams, Elizabeth announced formally, your employment with this company is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and human resources will contact you about final arrangements. Patricia's face crumpled as the reality hit her. Please, I can change. I didn't know. You're right, I said, speaking for the first time since the recording had played. You didn't know who I was, but that's exactly the point. You should treat every employee with dignity and respect, not because of their family connections, but because it's the right thing to do. Elizabeth smiled at me with pride. Exactly. That's the kind of leadership this company needs. As security arrived to escort Patricia from the building, she turned to me one final time. Claire, please. You could put in a good word for me. Tell them I was trying to help you. I looked at her with something that might have been pity. Patricia, you weren't trying to help me. You were trying to humiliate me, to make yourself feel powerful. And in doing so, you showed everyone in this room exactly what kind of leader you really are. The door closed behind Patricia Williams, and her reign of workplace intimidation came to an end. With Patricia's dramatic exit complete, the conference room felt like it had been purged of toxic energy. The remaining management team sat in stunned silence, processing the rapid transformation of their workplace hierarchy and wondering what consequences might await their own behavior. I remained standing near the center of the room, aware that every eye was on me as I prepared to address not just the immediate situation, but the systemic issues that had allowed Patricia's behavior to flourish unchecked for months. I want to say something about what just happened. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet space. Patricia was wrong about many things, but she was right about one: she didn't know who I was. The problem is that her treatment of me had nothing to do with my identity and everything to do with her character. Tom Bradley nodded slowly, his face still flushed with embarrassment at his own failure to intervene more forcefully. Every employee in this company deserves respect, dignity, and fair treatment, I continued, not because of their family connections, their educational background, or the designer labels in their closet, but because they're human beings contributing their talents to our shared success. Elizabeth watched me with obvious pride, but she remained silent, allowing me to establish my own voice and leadership presence with the team that would now be working under new management. David, I said, turning to address the operations manager directly, you supported Patricia's comments about dress codes and professional standards. I'm curious about your thoughts now that you understand the full context. David Rodriguez looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. His ambitious eagerness to please Patricia had evaporated, replaced by the sickening realization that he had enthusiastically participated in humiliating a member of the founding family. I was wrong. He stammered, his voice barely audible. I should never have supported that kind of treatment, regardless of who you are. I got caught up in trying to impress Patricia, and I lost sight of basic human decency. His honesty was unexpected, and I felt a flicker of hope that he might be capable of genuine growth. What would you do differently if faced with a similar situation in the future? David took a shaky breath. I would speak up for the person being targeted. I would remember that real leadership means protecting people who are vulnerable, not joining in when they're being attacked. That's exactly right. Elizabeth interjected, her voice carrying approval. Leadership isn't about impressing your superiors by putting others down. It's about creating an environment where everyone can succeed. I turned to Sarah Chen, who had been watching the conversation with keen attention. Sarah, you mentioned earlier that you've experienced similar treatment from Patricia. What would have made a difference for you during those incidents? Sarah's voice was stronger now, buoyed by the knowledge that Patricia could no longer retaliate against her. Having someone speak up would have meant everything. Feeling isolated and defenseless was almost worse than the actual criticism. Then let's make sure that never happens again, I said firmly. Tom, as senior manager, I'd like you to work with HR to implement an anonymous feedback system where employees can report workplace harassment without fear of retaliation. Tom straightened in his chair, clearly grateful for a chance to take positive action. Absolutely. I'll have a proposal ready by the end of the week. Elizabeth stepped forward, addressing the room with the authority of someone who had spent decades building corporate culture. I want everyone to understand that what happened here today isn't just about Patricia Williams. It's about the kind of company we choose to be. She gestured toward me with obvious affection. Claire has spent the past 18 months working anonymously in this organization, experiencing firsthand what our employees face every day. Her insights aren't theoretical. They're based on real experience at every level of our operations. The board members who had arrived during Patricia's downfall nodded with approval. They understood that they were witnessing not just the resolution of a personnel problem, but the emergence of a new generation of leadership with a fundamentally different approach to corporate culture. Which brings us to the question of department leadership going forward, Elizabeth continued. Claire, I believe you've completed your research phase. Are you ready to take on official responsibilities? I felt the weight of the moment, knowing that my next words would define not just my own career path, but the future direction of the entire department. I'd like to propose a transition period where I work closely with Tom to implement the cultural changes we've discussed. He has institutional knowledge that I need, and I have perspective that could benefit from his experience. Tom Bradley's relief was visible. He had clearly been terrified that he would lose his job for failing to stop Patricia's behavior, but I was offering him a chance at redemption instead. David, I continued, I'd like you to attend sensitivity training and work with Sarah to understand how your words and actions affect others. If you can demonstrate genuine change, there's a place for you on this team. David's gratitude was palpable. Thank you for giving me a chance to do better. I won't waste it. Elizabeth smiled with genuine warmth. This is exactly the kind of leadership our company needs, building people up instead of tearing them down. Robert Chen, the vice chairman stepped forward to address the practical implications. Claire, your approach to workplace culture is impressive, but I'm curious about your business perspective. Patricia's termination leaves us with operational gaps that need to be filled. It was a test, and I welcomed it. I've spent 18 months analyzing our operational efficiency, employee retention patterns, and client satisfaction metrics. Patricia's management style wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad for business. I moved to the whiteboard and began sketching out data trends I had been tracking. Employee turnover in Patricia's department was running at 37% annually compared to 12% company-wide. Exit interviews cited management style as the primary factor in 68% of departures. The board members leaned forward with interest as I continued. Replacing and training new employees was costing us approximately $2.4 million per year in this department alone. More importantly, we were losing institutional knowledge and client relationships every time someone left. Tom Bradley was nodding enthusiastically. Those numbers match what I've been seeing in the financial reports. I couldn't figure out why our training and recruitment costs were so high. Because we were treating symptoms instead of addressing the root cause, I explained. Patricia's approach created a hostile environment that drove away talented people. The solution isn't stricter dress codes or more hierarchy. It's better leadership. Sarah Chin raised her hand tentatively. What specific changes would you implement? I turned back to the whiteboard and began outlining a comprehensive plan. First, mandatory management training focused on inclusive leadership and conflict resolution. Second, regular one-on-one meetings between managers and direct reports to identify issues before they escalate. Third, clear advancement paths based on merit rather than politics. Elizabeth was beaming with pride as she watched me present ideas that combined business acumen with genuine concern for employee welfare. This was the synthesis of everything she had hoped I would learn during my time working anonymously in the company. The ultimate goal, I concluded, is to create a workplace where people are excited to contribute their best work because they feel valued and supported. That's not just good for morale, it's good for profits. Robert Chen was taking notes rapidly. These proposals are exactly what we need. When can you have a detailed implementation plan ready? 2 weeks, I replied confidently. I've been working on these ideas for months. I just needed the authority to put them into practice. As the formal board meeting began to wind down, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been transformed into genuine progress. Patricia's departure was only the beginning of much larger changes that would benefit every employee in the company. The woman who had mocked my grandmother's blazer was gone. But the values that blazer represented, humility, hard work, and respect for others, were about to become the foundation of a new corporate culture. 6 months later, I sat in my new office on the 43rd floor, reviewing employee satisfaction surveys that showed the most dramatic improvement in company history. The numbers told a story of transformation that went far beyond simple personnel changes. They reflected a fundamental shift in how our organization approached leadership, respect, and human dignity. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I studied the latest quarterly reports. Employee retention in our department had improved to 94%, the highest in the company's history. More importantly, productivity metrics showed a corresponding increase of 32%, proving that treating people well wasn't just morally right, it was incredibly profitable. A soft knock on my door interrupted my review. "Come in." I called, looking up to see Tom Bradley approaching with a folder of documents and a smile that had become much more frequent over the past months. "The final numbers are in from the Respectful Workplace Initiative," he announced, setting the folder on my desk with obvious satisfaction. "We've received over 300 applications from other companies wanting to implement similar programs." I opened the folder and scanned the summary report. Our employee advocacy program had become a model for businesses across the industry, with management consultants requesting detailed presentations about our transformation process. "Tom, when I think about how scared you were to speak up that day," I began. "Don't remind me," he laughed, though his expression carried a hint of remembered shame. I still can't believe I let Patricia continue that behavior for so long. Fear really does make us smaller than we want to be, just like you said. Tom had undergone his own remarkable transformation since that pivotal board meeting. He had thrown himself into the cultural reform process with the enthusiasm of someone seeking redemption, and his institutional knowledge had proven invaluable in implementing systemic changes. Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway carrying a tablet and wearing the confident expression of someone who had found her voice. Claire, the diversity and inclusion presentation is ready for the board review next week. The preliminary feedback from the pilot programs has been overwhelmingly positive. Sarah's journey had been particularly inspiring to witness. The woman who had once been intimidated into silence by Patricia's bullying had become one of our most effective advocates for workplace equity. Her marketing background had proven perfect for communicating our values, both internally and to the broader business community. "How's David doing with the new team management structure?" I asked. Sarah's smile was genuine. "Honestly, he's like a completely different person. The sensitivity training really opened his eyes, and now he's one of our strongest supporters for inclusive leadership practices." David Rodriguez had surprised everyone, including himself, with his capacity for change. The man who had once enthusiastically supported dress code policies designed to exclude people was now leading workshops on unconscious bias and respectful communication. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Lunch today. I want to hear about the Harvard Business School case study request." I smiled, remembering how proud Elizabeth had been when Harvard contacted us about developing a case study around our workplace transformation. The story of Patricia's downfall and our department's cultural evolution was becoming required reading in business ethics courses. As I prepared to respond to my mother's text, I caught my reflection in the window and noticed that I was wearing my grandmother's blazer again, not because I had to, but because I chose to. The vintage navy fabric had become my signature, a symbol of the values that guided my leadership approach. A soft chime indicated my computer had received a new email. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from an address I didn't recognize with the subject line, "Thank you from a former employee." Curious, I opened the message and found a note from Marcus Thompson, one of the employees who had quit during Patricia's reign of intimidation. "Dear Claire, I heard through industry contacts about the changes at your company. I wanted you to know that 3 of us who left because of Patricia's treatment have been offered positions to come back. More importantly, I wanted to thank you for creating the kind of workplace we all deserve. What you did took courage, and it's making a difference for people you'll never meet. Sincerely, Marcus." I felt tears prick at my eyes as I finished reading. This was what real victory looked like, not just Patricia's departure, but the ripple effects of the positive change that extended far beyond our own company. Another knock on my door revealed our newest team member, Jennifer Walsh, a recent graduate from Northwestern who had specifically sought us out because of our reputation for inclusive leadership. She was bright, ambitious, and wore clothes from Target without apology, exactly the kind of person Patricia would have targeted. "Claire, the new employee orientation feedback is incredible," Jennifer reported enthusiastically. "People are saying they've never worked anywhere that made them feel so welcomed and valued from day one." "That's the goal," I replied, remembering my own first day when Patricia had made it clear that I didn't belong. Everyone deserves to feel like they have a place at the table. As the morning progressed, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. Patricia Williams had been unable to find another executive position after word spread through the industry about her termination for workplace harassment. The business community was smaller than people realized, and companies were increasingly cautious about hiring managers with documented histories of discriminatory behavior. Meanwhile, our department had become a destination for top talent, specifically because of our culture. We were attracting people who could work anywhere but chose to work with us because they wanted to be part of something meaningful. The Respectful Workplace Initiative had grown beyond our original scope, spawning mentorship programs, community outreach efforts, and partnerships with universities to teach inclusive leadership to the next generation of business leaders. My grandmother's belief that character mattered more than connections had become the foundation of a movement. At noon, I walked to the executive dining room to meet my mother for lunch. The same security guard who had once watched Patricia escort people from the building now greeted me with warm familiarity. "Afternoon, Miss Ashford. Your mother's already at your usual table." Elizabeth stood as I approached, and we embraced with the easy affection of family members who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. She was wearing a pearl necklace that had belonged to my great-grandmother, another family heirloom that connected us to the values that built our company. "So tell me about Harvard," she said as we settled into our seats. "I understand they want to feature our transformation in their leadership curriculum. They're calling it the Ashford Model," I explained, still somewhat amazed by the academic attention our story had attracted. "The case study will focus on how authentic leadership and employee empowerment create sustainable competitive advantages." Elizabeth's smile was radiant. "Your grandmother would be so proud. She always believed that treating people right was good business, even when other companies were focused purely on short-term profits." As we talked, I thought about the lessons I had learned during my 18 months of working anonymously. The experience had taught me that real leadership meant using power to protect and elevate others, not to diminish them. Patricia had used her position to make people feel small and unwelcome. I was determined to use mine to help people realize their full potential. "There's something else," I said, pulling out a thick folder from my briefcase. "I've been working on a proposal to establish the Rose Ashford Foundation for Workplace Equity." Elizabeth's eyes widened with interest as I outlined my vision for a nonprofit organization that would provide resources and training to companies seeking to create more inclusive cultures. The foundation would offer grants, consulting services, and research opportunities focused on eliminating workplace discrimination. We could partner with the university's advocacy groups and other companies to create industry-wide standards for respectful leadership, I explained. The goal would be to ensure that what happened to me and what I saw happen to others becomes impossible to ignore or excuse. Elizabeth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "This is exactly what your grandfather envisioned when he talked about corporate responsibility extending beyond profit margins." As our lunch concluded, I felt a deep sense of purpose about the work ahead. Patricia's cruelty had been a catalyst for positive change that was now reaching far beyond our company walls. Every time a manager thought twice before making a disparaging comment, every time an employee felt safe reporting harassment, every time a company implemented better training programs, those were victories that honored my grandmother's memory and advanced her values. Walking back to my office, I passed the conference room where Patricia had humiliated me 6 months earlier. The space had been redesigned as a collaborative workspace where employees from all levels could gather for brainstorming sessions and team meetings. The hierarchical seating arrangement that Patricia had used to enforce status differences had been replaced with flexible furniture that encouraged equal participation. I paused in the doorway, remembering the fear and isolation I had felt in that room, but also the quiet strength I had drawn from my grandmother's blazer and my mother's teachings about patience and justice. The young woman who had endured Patricia's mockery had grown into a leader who could create the changes she wished she had seen. As I settled back at my desk to review foundation proposals, I realized that Patricia had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, a complete understanding of what needed to change and the motivation to change it. Her cruelty had become the catalyst for compassion, her exclusion had inspired inclusion, and her abuse of power had taught me how to use power responsibly. The employee satisfaction surveys spread across my desk told a story of transformation, but they also told a story of hope. Every positive response represented a person who felt valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work. That was Patricia's real legacy, not the fear and intimidation she had intended to create, but the opposite, a workplace where everyone could thrive. My phone buzzed with the calendar reminder about the 3 o'clock meeting with Harvard researchers who were documenting our transformation process. They wanted to understand not just what we had changed, but how those changes had created measurable improvements in both employee welfare and business performance. As I prepared my notes for that meeting, I included a final thought that I hoped would resonate with future business leaders. True strength in leadership comes not from making others feel small, but from helping them discover how big they can become. Have you ever found yourself in a workplace situation where someone tried to diminish your worth based on superficial judgments? How did you handle it? And what changes would you want to see in corporate culture? I'd love to hear your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the power of standing up for workplace dignity. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations and creating positive change in our professional lives. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's limited vision. Sometimes the best response to those who try to make you feel small is to show them through your actions and character just how powerful kindness, competence, and authentic leadership can be.